Is that what you're saying?
That's a good word.
You know, I only say things I mean, Rob, behind closed doors, in public, recorded or not. So it's all right. I'm not worried. All right, kiddos.
I was actually Stephanie. So.
You were talking to Ben? All right. 2 minutes. Who's there? I can see Ben. I saw Dan. Hi, Dan. You're somewhere, right? Hey,
Hey, friend.
up? Hey, Stephanie. Hey, Ben. Or Dan. And hey, Kathy, what's up? Hey, how's it going? Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Dan, I got your email. Appreciate the concern. I'll let the board figure it out.
Left my mic. So there's in the back too. Nice and made up.
Hey, Phyllis.
One more thing I'm going to try to figure out. But I can do it right here. Hey, Mr. Moore.
Kendra, we are live, by the way, so.
Thanks for the.
I also did not realize that when I logged.
Mike, where are you again?
I am in San Francisco right now. It is 6:30 in the morning, and I've been up for a few hours, probably longer than some of you, actually, which is crazy, but you know. So I'm ready to go. It's 9:30, right? All right. I'm not usually on this side of things for these meetings. This is kind of weird. All right, so we'll start as we always do with a quick round of introductions. Welcome to the April 19th edition of Policy and Equity Committee. And we'll start with the man behind the curtain.
Rob Wilson, technician.
And Phyllis Davis.
Board's Administrative Assistant, Phyllis Davis.
Thanks for being here. And our friend representing Jewish Federation of Cincinnati. Yes, or did I get that wrong? Or council? I'm sorry. I got.
No, it's a long formal title and you got it mostly right. I am representing the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati's Jewish Community Relations Council, Rabbi Ari John.
Great. We have a few Jewish agencies in my chamber for my real job. And so I get the acronym screwed up. Ms. Vogel always reminds me she was the original JFS. Is one of her favorite things to say to me. All right. Board member Lindy.
Morning, Board Member Lindy.
I stole his thunder. Kendra.
Good morning, Board Member Matt.
There's no thunder, Mike.
Dan Hoying.
Nope, the superintendent's here also.
Superintendent Wright was not there the last time I looked, so that is not my.
Good morning, Ariana Wright, Superintendent.
Dan Hoying, General Counsel.
Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here, you all. It was kind of you to leave the center seat empty for me. I am out of town, which I'm sure you can tell if you are piping in from afar. We have a brief but mighty agenda. And I was going to ask first if my colleagues, Ms. Mapp and Mr. Lindy, had any objection to just starting with the anti-hate speech piece, which is last on the agenda, but move it first so that our friend Rabbi can get on with his day. Good. Ben, seems okay. Is that all right with you, Kendra?
You were breaking up a bit. So you could just restate what you were saying. I'm believing that you're asking if we're okay with the agenda, starting with the hate speech, and if that's what you stated, I'm okay with that.
Cool. Well, that is what I said. So to start with, I believe the way we were gonna kind of proceed with phase 2 of this, I kick it over and defer to General Counsel and Assistant General Counsel. Have there been updates? I believe the rabbis met with some folks, but could you just update us first, please?
So yes, in the packet, we have currently a draft, a hate speech policy. At the last meeting, this was given as an assignment to kind of start, to kind of use this draft as a discussion point, jump off as far as developing a full policy, for the district. And so we've attempted to, incorporate some of the discussion that's already has taken place, with, some of the people in the community that this is of interest to, which was of interest of all of us. But I know that, as you mentioned, Rabbi Ari is here. We've had some discussions and trying to work, with various communities to make sure this speaks to, the district's commitment to making sure that, hate speech and hate motivated behavior, that it's very clear that it's not acceptable within the district. And so again, we've drafted this policy. We've in some ways tried to emulate the framework of the anti-racism policy as far as specific call outs, but also just tried to address some of the concerns that have been expressed. So welcome any questions that we may have.
Great. Well, as always, I'll start with my colleagues, and I can't see them, so I'll just defer to you since we're all friends and get along to just kind of go in whatever order you want to go in. So Mr. Lindy or Ms. Mapp, if you have questions.
Not at the moment, but give me a little bit of time.
Thanks, Mike. I was just gonna ask, with Stephanie or Dan, is there anything in particular here you wanted to voice over that felt particularly important? I having read it, I don't have any concerns, and I'm glad we're gonna have something on the books. But I know you put a lot of thought into this.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to make sure we notice?
Well, in the first paragraph, I did just want to call out, as far as, again, we're trying to make sure that this is it's in community with some of the policies we already have. So we call out the equity policy and the anti-racism policy. So again, as we call out the specific areas that we want to protect, that those classes mimic our other policies. So just wanted to call that out. And then specifically, under the conflict resolution, I know that there was conversation before again about, again, making sure that our response is consistent with the district's current restorative practices. So we have a paragraph there that kind of calls that out and kind of the approach in agreement with the policy enforcement as well. So I think, again, we attempted to try to summarize some of the concerns and approach that the district would want to take, but basically making sure that it was more explicit. So when these incidents happen, the people would have a more direct kind of framework to work from. But still leaving some, discretion for administration, as well as, the principals and so on and so forth who would be responding to these situations.
You have anything else, Mr. Lindy? I have a couple comments, unless you have a couple more, or Ms. Mapp does.
I do. I have one question pertaining to the training and professional development. Do you all kind of have an idea of what that would entail at the moment, or is that something that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more?
I think it's something that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. We did meet with chief of staff who actually oversees kind of the DEI things within the district already. So we actually had a brief conversation with him, and I know that's on his radar as far as kind of incorporating this with also the training that we already do for the anti-racism and equity policies, but making sure again that there's more of a specific call out for this behavior as well included in that.
Thank you for that.
I want to give our guest a couple minutes as well. Been grateful that Rabbi, brought some of these issues to our attention at our previous meeting and has been working with folks. And I really appreciate general counsel and assistant counsel working with other groups similar, again, to your point, Ms. Scott, like we did with the anti-racism. The one thing I wanted to call before I'll kick it over to our guests that I'm exceptionally fond of, and this came up at the last meeting quite a bit, is the second to last, or penultimate, if you will, paragraph under policy enforcement, about how all of these opportunities are opportunities to work with a young person, to let them know the history, social ramifications of the speech, etc. which without making too many assumptions, I'm going to, assume a lot of teenagers and younger may not be aware of, what the things they are saying are tied to, where they came from, et cetera. And that goes for all sorts of groups that have been belittled and demeaned for years. So I really, really, really like that piece. The only other thing I would draw attention to, just for, the public's edification, if anybody's watching or reads these minutes later on, we talked about this a lot, Ms. Scott, and I know Mr. Hoying and I did a couple of years ago with the anti-racism policy that, most policies are not that prescriptive by nature. And, to the training and professional development piece, that feels pretty prescriptive, which I think is great. We talked a lot with anti-racism that we all felt as a board it was so important that it deserved to be a little prescriptive in nature. This one is not very prescriptive, but I think the pieces like the training, professional development, and then the paragraph I called out a second ago are warranted. And I just kind of wanted to say that for the record. And I really appreciate the hard work. So thank you. And then Rabbi, do you have anything to add? We appreciate you showing up to our meeting.
So I just read through this very quickly now. First of all, I want to thank you. Well, I want to thank you all. You did the legwork here to draft this, and I appreciate you taking the time to create a policy that to me looks very thoughtful and appropriate. I should also say hello, Superintendent Wright. You were here when I popped into the room, but it's good to see you. There are only a few things in my quick read through that I had questions about. The first had to do with the training and professional development. My questions actually were remarkably similar to yours about what this could look like. Given the season of the year we're in, I'm specifically wondering if this is something which could be appropriately integrated into training for faculty during their start of year in services, because I imagine they may have questions about this policy and how they're meant to be able to help enforce and counsel related to it. I'll flag one other question actually that came to mind for me vis-a-vis the ultimate paragraph, the final paragraph under policy enforcements. I'm curious what particularly is in mind, these anonymous means and things like that. I imagine there are already models that would just be included here. I'm just not personally familiar with them. And then I guess the related question that I have, then I promise I'm done, is about how we ensure that our families are aware that these mechanisms exist.
So I think
if I may, was that the superintendent that was trying to talk?
it was, but I can defer to you.
I'm going to kick it to you in a second, if I may. So this is why I said what I said about the prescriptive piece. Those are good questions, but those are not really questions, I think, for this committee. I mean, this committee, we want to talk about this policy. Once it gets passed, then I think those first two questions, I'm going to come back to your third one, though. Those first two questions are the questions I think every board member will have after we pass this. But then that's the superintendent's job with her team to figure that out. So we won't talk about that here with us. The superintendent, if I know her, and I think I do, I'm pretty good, will reach out to people to help with all of that. So I don't want to, if it's okay, I don't want to spend really any time talking about that because that's more her house, not ours. So that's, and this is why policies tend not to be prescriptive, because our job is the policy and the framework. I don't know if that's what the superintendent was going to say. I don't want to, I've already stolen thunder once today. I don't want to do it again.
You just did. You did it
okay.
again. You did it
Hey.
again, but it's perfectly fine.
I still have
I'm on fire. I want to go hang out in San Francisco and get out of this meeting quick. No, that's not true. I want to hang out with you guys. But the third question, and again, I'm not trying to shoot down the question because that's the right question. The third one about the communication, I think if that's okay, superintendent, I can kick that one to you again. I wasn't trying to interrupt, but as long as we're fine with these, I think those prescriptive pieces are good, but not that we spend any time talking about them here. The superintendent.
Thank you. And so in terms,
So thank you, Board Member Morowski, Chair Morowski today. In terms of the last question around parents, it's kind of like we would do, last year we had a change in our code of conduct. And so as a part of that, we did a video that went out to all families, all students. We put it on all of our social media sites. There was also an acknowledgement that went to families that we asked for families to sign off on as well. And we scheduled for specific responses for specific presentations to be done with students as well. So taking a three-prong approach to making sure the information gets out.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And of course, I'm not surprised that you have thoughtful ways of anticipating integrating this. I just want to make sure to surface the questions I had when I saw this appropriately not too prescriptive policy.
That was wow. I tell you can chair this meeting next. Yeah. No, and again, I appreciate the questions. I imagine we'll have them, but really what we want to do today, or what I would like to do today, is I haven't heard anything substantive regarding the language of the actual policy that at least my colleagues, Ms. Mapp and Mr. Lindy, have issues with. So I want to bring it back to y'all too, because if you don't, and while there's no hurry, I mean, something that's important, I tend to, as you all know, I want to kind of get this done because I think it is really important. If there's nothing substantive about the language, we could put it on the next full board agenda at the end of April, but I want to give it back to you two. And if you want more time with it, that's fine too. That's okay. We can talk about it in May as well, but Mr. Lindy or Ms. Mapp, if you don't, then we could move it forward to the full board.
So, I'll say upon my initial reading of it, it does look, good. There's nothing that's, blaring to me at the moment, but if possible, I would like to just spend a little bit more time with it, just to make sure that I'm certain about the details that I'm reading. But again, looking at it initially, it does look really good. So thank you for that.
Great.
And Mike, it looks good to me. I'm happy to move as quickly as folks would like.
Cool. And so am I, which is 2 to 3. So you lose, Kendra. But that's not how I roll. As everybody knows, that's not how I do things. So we will wait. That's not how I like to do it in this committee. So there's a reason I think we've gotten so much done. And I think it's because we always have, unanimous on this team. So Ms. Mapp, take your time. And then you know what? We have plenty of days to the next meeting, so we could really meet in the middle, if you want to spend some time, if you feel good, on next Friday, for example, you know what I mean, or next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Shoot it to the committee and Mr. Hoying, the superintendent, and we could even get it on the agenda then. But again, no hurry. If not, we can look at it again in May if you'd like, if you have substantive changes. No problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it will take that long, but I definitely think we can meet in the middle. So thank you for
Sure.
offering that space.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. And then Rabbi, do you have anything to say in closing? Again, I want to give you out of respect to, coming to these meetings and helping us to make us better. Our job is to listen to the community and try to do good with what we hear. So is there anything you'd like to say before we move on in the agenda?
No, you're very kind to give me the opportunity. I would only express my gratitude. Thank you for moving so quickly on this.
Right on. Well, again, thanks for the inspiration, and thanks, Dan and Stephanie. Since I'm in a hotel room with 2 unmade beds behind me, I'm feeling very informal, as opposed to normal when I'm very, very formal. So thank you, Dan and Stephanie, for being here, and thanks, Rabbi. The first 2 items on the agenda.
Thank you all very much.
Were a conflict of interest policy 1130, which is the current and then board bylaw 0141.1 conflict of interest. We talked about both of these, but if it's okay, you'll recall at our last meeting or the meeting before, either way, Mr. Lindy had assigned this conflict of interest idea to the agenda. Excuse me. And then at the last meeting, I believe it was in March, that March 8th one, we talked about wanting to talk about this with think about it a little more, bring it back, et cetera. So if Ben is okay with it, do you mind if I kick it to you, Ben, to give some framework after I look to general counsel and assistant counsel to see if there's an update on this 1130 or 0141.1? I don't imagine there might be, but I just want to make sure. So I'll kick it over to our attorneys first to see if there's an update before I go to Ben, if he's okay with that.
Yeah, no update. The board packet included both board policies 1130 and then 0140, which essentially incorporates the same language into the board bylaws as well. We included the form that the board has been using and asking board members to sign regarding potential conflicts of interest. And I think that was the ask from the board, was to include these three policies.
I think that was right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan. And then Ben, are you okay if I kick it to you to just kind of frame this up?
Yeah, Mike, I'm happy to.
Great.
And I'm going to hand something out in a second, and I'm just realizing that I need to send it to you because I can't hand you a sheet of paper in the room. So give me just one
No, we
second here.
haven't figured out how to do that yet. But we're pretty good, Ben. We're not that good. So yeah, you shoot it to whichever email you want. I'll get it.
All right. So give me just 1 second, Mike, and I will send this your way.
Hey, by the way, while we're waiting, Rob, I know a couple meetings ago or last meeting even, I think policy, what was the guinea pig for the new presentation stuff? From this end, it looks great. Good job. I just want to tell you, good job.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate you, buddy.
Yeah. I
All
kind of
right.
like the graffiti on the brick wall that I'm looking at. It's like a nice, anyway. Okay,
All right, Mike, that's on its way.
great.
And thanks everybody, Dan and Stephanie, for the documents, and thanks for the time on the agenda this morning. I really appreciate it. I've been thinking a lot about the moment we're in as a city, as a board, and I've just heard in a number of different contexts, and I think this is right. That's an important time to continue strengthening public trust between the public and the Board of Education. I think there are a lot of reasons why that's the case. My first couple of months on the school board, my first year, was the schools closing for COVID, and an enormous amount of tension and difficulty around whether we should have schools open, whether they should be closed, who was going to make those decisions, what was going to happen in a given board meeting. And I think trust was low as a result of all of that. And I say that descriptively and with no blame. It was an enormously challenging situation. But even after COVID, we've had any number of challenges around transportation, particularly last year. I'm so delighted that that's gotten better, but I still think there's a chance to strengthen trust with the public. Certainly our budget process that we're in the middle of is enormously challenging. And even more recently, we've had an enormous community response to the idea that some schools might be consolidated or closed. And so for a number of different reasons, I think anything we can do to strengthen trust between the public and the board is a good thing. And so one of the things I think we could do to strengthen public trust is to strengthen our conflict of interest policy. And so I have an idea here that I'd like to share with everyone, but I think this is particularly important, not just because of our own efforts to strengthen trust, but if we widen the aperture slightly, wasn't that long ago that a large chunk of city council was embroiled in some very serious corruption concerns. 2 of the last 3, I think, maybe 2 of the last 4 speakers of the House for the Ohio General Assembly were investigated by the FBI, are now in prison. And so whether it's the board, whether it's the city, or whether it's the state, I think things that we can do to show publicly how squeaky clean we are and how much we care about doing things the right way, I think is a good thing. So what I wanted to do is introduce today, and then Phyllis, this is you. Yeah.
I just sent it to you. Okay. If you wanted to display it.
Yeah, thank you, Phyllis. I didn't think you sent it to Rob. That's great. And so Rob, whenever that comes through, if you want to pull it up. But what I'm introducing today is something that would be an addendum to our current conflicts policy. It would not replace it. It would go on as an addition at the end of the policy. I like the policy we have. I think this is a way we can make it stronger. And what it does is it requires board member recusal from discussions or votes that impact groups or individuals who have made major campaign contributions. So again, I think the idea here are ways that we can strengthen the trust that we have with the public. I'll give folks a chance just to put their eyes on it, and then we can talk about it together for a second.
I'm just reading now, and then we're rereading. And then I'll kick off the conversation to Miss Mapp, or actually Miss Mapp, you can just respond whenever you're ready. That makes more sense.
And Mike, I'm happy to give it a little bit of a voiceover too, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah, please.
Yeah. So again, I think opportunity to strengthen public trust. I think context again with the corruption challenges we've seen in the city, with the corruption challenges we've seen in the state. I think this feels like an easy win to show how seriously we take our votes, and that we're going to draw a line around campaign contributions of a certain size influencing the way that board members vote on issues. And so what the proposal does is say that if a board member is received above a certain threshold, here it says $5,000 from any individual or organization, the board member would recuse herself or himself basically over things that impact the donor or discussions about things that would impact the donor. And I think that's the right thing to do. I would say that I think at least some of my colleagues, I think, do this already and choose to make a real point, not to vote on things that impact people who've contributed to their campaign. And so, I added here a piece in the next paragraph that says, I guess the next two paragraphs are like, what happens if someone doesn't recuse on one of the things in that first paragraph? And I would just call people's attention to, in that second paragraph, first of all, it says this has to be intentional or knowing. I know sometimes our treasurer's reports are very long. Our superintendent's reports can be very long, and it's possible folks miss something. And I think this is good faith errors are not what this contemplates. But if there's an intentional or knowing failure to recuse, then basically it's saying you got to retake the vote without that board member's vote in it. And then the very last thing it says is if there is failure to recuse, and again, this is a knowing or intentional failure to recuse, it's pretty clear that the proposal names this as a reason why a board member could vote in favor of a censure motion. There aren't that many disciplinary tools that we have as a board. They're kind of non-CPS related news stories that have covered this in great detail recently. But what our bylaws do is set up censure as a tool. And this is also pretty clear that failure to recuse isn't an automatic conveying of censure. There would still need to be a vote, and the board would need to decide that that's what they do. It just says in the proposal really clearly that this is a reason why a board member could choose to vote that way. So again, zooming out big picture, I think this is an easy win on the public trust front. And I'm very eager to hear what feedback people have.
Thank you, Board Member Lindy. I really appreciate the context that you provided with this possible addendum to the policy. And I do think that it will help to, build or continue to build the trust. And I'm always in favor of anything that is going to align with the ethics and upholding integrity. And so Board Member Lindy was referencing myself in terms of recusing from different votes, because I do think that is something that's very serious. And again, optics are important. And so you always want to make sure, I think we will always want to make sure that we are doing things that present to be transparent as well as ethical. So I would be in favor of supporting this.
Right on. Thank you, Ms. Mapp. No additions or regarding wording or anything?
No, not at the moment, not from what I'm seeing.
Great. All right, well then I will go. Thank you, Ben, for bringing this up. I do not disagree. In fact, I adamantly agree and vehemently agree that any efforts any public body can make to build trust, at any time, whether it's via policy, behavior, et cetera, with the public is a good idea and warrants a lengthy discussion. And I appreciate you for bringing this to us. A couple of years ago, Mr. Lindy was on this committee. He did a whole lot of legwork regarding some labor issues, and it was wonderful. And so I see this as another potentially transformative sort of thing. And I think, and this will lead into my questions, and they're for the attorneys in the room, the smart folks of whom Ben is one. So for Dan and Stephanie, my only questions, the wording I think is sound. My only questions is first, and this one, I should preface this by saying this is not going to sway my opinion on this one way or the other, because I think it's a good idea. I'm just curious, and then I have a more substantive question, I think. So for my edification, is there a precedent for this kind of thing? Again, not worried about it necessarily, because we love being first, and we've been first in a lot of ways already. We're about to be with anti-hate speech, but is there a precedent for this? I'm just curious. In any kind of elected body?
I have no idea whether there's a precedent.
Right on. All right. Well then, yeah.
Chair
Mr.
Morosky,
Lindy?
can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, go for it, please.
This was inspired a little bit by a recent policy passed by the Albuquerque School Board that I think may even have a lower threshold. I think they may have had 500 or 1,000. I'm not totally sure. But they recently passed a very similar policy. So I wish we could be first. I like being first too. But we could certainly be first this side of the Mississippi, which is something.
Oh, well, that sold. No, okay. So, okay, great. So Albuquerque, New Mexico. Cool. And then for the council, or it's Mr. Lindy's done his research, which I shouldn't be surprised. So if you have JD after your name, you're allowed to respond to this. Okay. I think that's you three. There might be another one. Is it, and again, I don't know, but just as a policy guy, and I like policy, the vote piece, like obviously the second little paragraph sentence here, the intentional or knowing failure to recuse shall invalidate that board member's vote. I'll just make a statement and tell me if I'm right or wrong. I assume, like regarding voting and how our votes are counted and what they mean, I know there's like Ohio Revised Code, and there are all these statutes and things that give us authority to do this in our representative democracy. If you encode something like this in your own policy, in your own house, so CPS, then the negating votes, that's something we have the power to do then as a body, I assume. Correct? I've just never seen something like that. And again, I have no problem with it. I'm just curious because I've never seen it. And it's interesting to me. I don't think it's a bad idea, but that's something we have the power to do if we encode it in our own policies.
Chair Morosky, that I think is the crux of the question, probably with the policy. So I don't think there's any question that this would go further than Ohio's current ethics laws in terms of what a board member is allowed to participate or not. There are certain votes that a board member may not participate in because it would be personally enriching to the board member. It involves a board member's family. We've talked about that in terms of the basic ethic rules in Ohio. This goes further than that. And so then I think the question is what would be the crux of the question would be what can be the consequence of the board's own rule? And this is something we talked a little bit about when we were in the bylaws discussion, because there was an interest, I think, in the board in putting some teeth into the bylaws and saying what would be the consequence of a board member violating our own bylaws. And one of the things we did a little bit of research on at that time is like, there's no opportunity, for example, for the board on its own to vote one of its own members off the island. You can't do that. Like, everyone was duly elected by the voters. And so even a violation of the board's own bylaws would not allow the board to somehow kick a member off. We on the other side of the spectrum, we determined it was, I think, well within the board's rights in censuring a board member to say, we're going to remove a committee assignment as a board. We're going to remove an officer position if you violate our own bylaws. I think those are clearly within the powers of the board to enforce its own bylaws, and that those would be appropriate sanctions that no one would sort of second guess. I think negating a vote or prohibiting a board member for participating in deliberations on a vote, that's I think the crux of the question as to whether or not this is a okay policy, a policy that would pass muster or not. It's a question. I don't know the answer.
Well, yeah, that was the interesting piece to me too. And I always feel like 10 times smarter when I ask a question that Dan doesn't know the answer to. So I've won for today, for in my mind anyway. So Mr. Lindy, I know, again, you've looked into this way more. Have you seen anything about this? Do you know, or was this just kind of like aspirational, or is there a precedent, or could we ask, the council's office to look into it more?
Yeah, I think it's what matters, I think, to me, Mike, is the intention and the ethical bar that it's setting. I'm less tied to like a specific, I'm less tied to many of the specifics within it. And maybe first of all, if this is something that we are allowed to do, I'd like to advocate for it. If it's very clear that we're not allowed to do this, we should do something else. But if it's gray and it might be construed as fine, it might not be construed as fine, I think we should set a high bar. And then let someone tell us that we need to have lower ethical standards than we have. But if, and I think as a next step, Mike, I 100% agree with you, like to do ask council's office for some research and we'll find it out. And I had forgotten actually the piece, Mr. Hoying, about the loss of committee assignments or leadership positions. And so like, if this needs to become instead like that, instead of what's currently on there, I still think that makes us better than we are today. I just would say again, unless there's some reason why we know we are not allowed to do this, I'd like to advocate that we set a high bar.
I agree with that. Before I have kind of a wrap up sort of comment, Ms. Mapp, I want to make sure you've said what you want. Do you have anything else to add?
I do not. Thank you for asking though.
Superintendent, do you have any comments?
I don't actually. I think that all of us, especially as we think about trying to define or continue to further define ethics and what ethics looks like for us, I think it would be really pretty interesting to see where this direction leads us. So yeah. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. No, Ben, 33% of our city council went to jail, a couple of years ago. And if the state of Ohio had its way, we would be allowed to do whatever we want. It's like the Wild West up there, for God's sake. And so again, I applaud my colleague for bringing this to us and holding us to a higher bar in a state where it is literally legal to lie in campaign ads and like encouraged at times. So if I heard it correct for general counsel, and I'm going to ask Mr. Lindy one last time to just confirm or add anything, poke around on this policy, see if that piece about the votes is even legal, and then bring this back to the May policy meeting, and then maybe not just that sentence, but I guess the whole thing in Ohio, and see if it passes muster, et cetera. But then I'll give it to Mr. Lindy one more time before we move on to make sure that that sounds right.
That's exactly what I would have said. Thanks, Mike.
Cool. Mr. Lindy specializes when he's on this committee in finding very interesting gray areas. Even though this is very different than the last policy we did regarding labor, it's a similar kind of issue, right? Like we're not really sure if we can't. So I look forward to seeing what happens. So General
And for
Counsel,
Mike, just for the historical record, the labor policy was a responsible bidder policy. So for people who weren't here, trying to make sure that we were trying to bring to the surface when people submit their bids, do they have a strong apprenticeship program? Do they offer healthcare and retirement benefits to their employees?
Yep.
And if we can, but it's like we were looking at with the guardrail report on Wednesday. If we can find a way to use our resources as a really large organization for good, I think that's a good thing.
purchasing power speaks in this country. Counsel's office, you guys good? Guys and gals good with the assignment?
We have the direction. Yes, thank you.
Cool. All right, moving on. Good stuff. All right, so the next thing, and the advertising of clubs. So this was I don't know that this needs to actually be on here, and if it doesn't, that's my mistake. I'm gonna look to counsel's office. I think we kind of covered this, but if there's an update, let me know. If not, we'll move on.
Sorry, that's on. Yeah, we discussed this briefly at the last meeting, and I don't think there's any need for further discussion on it.
Okay, that's my fault then. Student fees. We know, thanks to the superintendent's leadership, I'm going to kick it to the superintendent if she's okay with that. Just as sort of a general reminder that we're only, and I got a question from a board member. It was a good question, I thought, about, some schools have special fees for special things that enable them to do special activities with kids. And I reminded our board member that this is just about the base fee that we're going to waive from the state and cover it. Because we think it's the right thing to do. We're going to waive all student fees, even though that's something that we would like to do someday, maybe. So superintendent, just if you want to reiterate that fact, great. If you're good with what I just said, fine too. And then I'll see if council has anything to add about the policy itself in language. I don't know if there is, but just out of respect.
Thank you, Chair Morosky. So yes, this is about the last policy was around with starting with next year waiving the state fee, around not having the state fees that students have been paying yearly. And I would like to call out at this point, Mr. Marvin Butts. I really think we should call that the Marvin Butts policy, if we can. We know that last year, Mr. Butts paid over $65,000 for student fees for our students. For students that were having challenges getting those done. And that was born out of his own graduation time. I want to say 1977. That's how long it's been around, that he was told that he could not graduate at that time because of student fees. So that's a part of his interest in that space. So I just wanted to definitely share that. In terms of the policy that we're looking at today, this gives the opportunity or gives the guidance around what else happens as we waive fees. So under what conditions we are able to continue to waive school fees, and what that waiver process looks like.
Thank you so much. And so would it be good then we'll go to the council's office and or get an update there or not? And also, I just want to point out for the public's edification, if you don't know Mr. Butts, he's awesome. And he is the proprietor of the greatest car wash in Southwest Ohio, Mr. Bubbles, in the Pendleton neighborhood. Sorry. Okay. Point of privilege. Go ahead, Dan. Yeah,
Just want to emphasize what the superintendent said. This is a policy that is still used and shared with principals to say, as you get closer to graduation, there is always the opportunity to waive fees if if a family is in need or a student has a need for good reason to waive those fees. So this is a policy that's still used.
Right. It's definitely one. And correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody can, just with a nod or whatever. That would probably be a good idea to just remind everybody we have. I guess it sounds like. especially this time of year.
Actually, Chair Morosky, where we see it the most is with high schools around the time of graduation.
Yeah.
And most recently, we did have reminder conversations with our high school principals around this specific policy and where we're looking at waiving and how we're looking to do that. So we've already started that process. And then next year, we know we will put the process in place across, the K-12 system so that we will remove the 24-25 fees.
That's awesome. I love when we're all on the same page. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, General Counsel. And my colleagues, whoever wants to go first can if they want. If not, feel free. We can move on. But Kendra, Ben?
I'm good to move on.
Nothing here, Mike. Thank you.
Right. It's almost too easy. Crowdsourcing. This was carried over 7230.02. This policy pops up every couple years. I'll kick it over to the council's office. Are there any updates from y'all's end on this at all?
No, this is the policy that the board has been working on along with the receipt of gifts.
Yep.
And shortly before the last board meeting, I think the gifts policy went forward and was adopted by the board. This one, there was a board member who I think had some additional comments, and I'm not sure our office received them. I know it was pulled and not passed at the last board meeting.
It was me.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
it was me. Sorry. I probably didn't need to tee you up that way. I apologize, Dan.
No, that's all right.
No, it was me, and it was late notice, and I really appreciate everybody offering grace to pull it a little bit. I don't have for myself necessarily any real or any objection to it. I was just curious what had been I had heard from teachers, paras and others who I know in the district, whether casually or working in the schools where my kid is or other kids. They were curious what it was because they hadn't seen it. And I was just wondering if there had been gathering of any kind of information from practitioners in the field on how they use the crowdsourcing. And I asked that because last year when this came up at the end of the year, Mary Weinberg was on the committee who had taught in CPS for 10 years and had a ton of feedback about things that to be perfectly honest, didn't even really fully understand. And I remember Dan, one day, especially, you two got in a great conversation where you were like, oh, geez, I hadn't thought of it this way and that way. Anyway, to sum up, I was just curious before we passed it, had we gathered information from folks in our buildings, or excuse me, input regarding this policy before we put it on the agenda? So I'm sorry I didn't give that context first.
not at all. I'm glad you teed it up that way. So I would say yes, we have received feedback. And just to give a brief history of this policy again. So I think it was 2018, the auditor's office put out a notification to all school districts saying school districts should have a crowdsourcing policy.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't exactly say what it should include. Didn't exactly, there was no model policy. To my recollection, the first policy that came out in the state was from Dayton, and Dayton put about a 2-sentence policy together that said there will be no crowdsourcing used in the schools. And we had a discussion with the committee at that time, and that raised a lot of concerns from teachers and practitioners in the field saying, no, this is an important source of funding for our classrooms. So after, I would say, again, 5 years have passed since that sort of notification from the auditor's office. There are a lot of policies that we sort of drew on to try to put something together for ourselves. CFT was in the room, I would say, for the first 2 or 3 discussions of this policy and saw it. We did incorporate board member Weinberg's, I thought, excellent comment. Her point was that to the extent feasible, we can sort of earmark funds for the teacher who raised them. And so
Yep.
that's incorporated in section 4 on the second page. To the extent feasible and consistent with board policies and ethics laws, the board
Right.
approves funds raised to be earmarked by the district for use in a specific classroom or teacher or department consistent with the campaign. So I think we've heard from lots of folks on this policy,
Great.
and I think we're ready to move forward, but glad to take
Cool.
any further comment.
Yeah, well, then we can put it back in the agenda for passage. I didn't necessarily want to throw all that out there at the meeting. So again, apologies for not giving the framing ahead of time. So I'll look to well, metaphorically speaking, I can't see them, but Ben and Kendra, if they have any comments about this.
Yes, just a quick question. So I'm reading the beginning of the policy, and it says the Board of Education is appreciative of the additional school funding that can be raised through external donations from internet campaigns. So is that limiting? Is it just limited to internet campaigns, or is it any type of, I guess, fundraising initiatives?
So this policy actually works hand in hand with another new policy that we passed at the last meeting, 7230, gifts, donations, and bequests. So that's the all-encompassing one, and this is specific on like crowdsourcing over the internet, essentially.
That's all I have. Thanks. Thank you for that clarification.
Nothing further here, Mike. Thank you.
Right on. Well, yeah, well, excuse me. We'll toss that on the agenda for passage then. I believe it's the April 28th, if I'm not mistaken. And then we will, for the next meeting, Ms. Davis, obviously we'll bring up, the anti-hate speech again, unless Ms. Mapp gives us the green light between now and the 28th. And if not, again, there's no hurry. So that's fine. Take your time. Then we'll have the conflict, of interest, addendum or whatever we want to call it. We'll have our, council's assistant general and otherwise report on the feasibility of this vote piece and everything else, see how it fits within our lawless state. And right now that appears to be it for carryover. I'm going to look to my colleagues and the administration to make sure I didn't miss anything as far as carryover to the next meeting. It's really I think those two pieces and potentially one if anti-hate speech moves forward, but is that right? Those two?
Yep, that's it. Yep.
Great. Well then other business, and then this could, since we have so much time, could either happen now or get moved over if people want 40 minutes of their time back. So I don't have other business right now, but obviously I'll look to my colleagues to see if they have anything they'd like to bring up.
Mike, I can give us 35 minutes back, maybe even 37 minutes back if I can have 2 or 3 minutes.
Cool. Yeah, go for it.
So just some of you know this, but I last weekend I had this really fascinating trip to a conference in San Diego that was about artificial intelligence in education. And I learned a lot. There's a lot I don't know. But schools are doing really interesting things on this front. And I know our superintendent is one of the most tech savvy people I've met and knows a lot about artificial intelligence, likely more than I do. But one of the wonderings I came away with was, is there some role for us to play with an AI policy in the next blank number of months? I don't know if that's 6 or 18 or 2. Like there's no urgency on this, but I wanted to at least plant a seed. One, because I think there's a lot of potential to tailor things for individual students' needs, ways to make the lives of teachers easier, ways to get much more powerful analytics from district data. But there's also a lot of risks involved too. And there's also like potentially what Mike, to your point earlier about being first in something. I don't think a lot of districts have passed AI policies yet. I'm sure there are some out there, but I'd be willing to bet we could be first in Ohio. If not first in a broader area. So if that is of interest to my colleagues, the administration, I might put it in the queue for something for us to talk about this year. But there's no urgency on it on my end.
Yes. In my wife's old job, she just switched jobs, but in her old job, she was working with this national kind of techie campaign firm. And all she talked about the last year in the job was AI. And and people are talking about it all over the place. And we had some consternation already with some AI software regarding attendance this year. And I'm going to go ahead and speed up that process and see if we can't just put AI, whatever, I don't care how it's worded, on the agenda for next month. And then I'll do some poking too. I'm so glad you brought this up. I'll use my extra 35 minutes because my family said they'd leave me alone till 11. So I'm gonna capitalize on my 35 minutes and start poking around now. So if the council's cool with it, if you just want to look around a little bit, you don't need to, don't take up too much of your time. We'll get the conversation going. Is that okay with you, Kendra? Does that sound like a good use of our time?
Yes, that is totally fine. And I would definitely have interest in it in terms of the ramifications and the risks associated with it.
If I may,
Great.
may I add,
Yeah,
Chair Morosky? So this is very timely. Thank you for sharing that. We are currently working with EIP right now to do presentations and protocols around AI. And so this is really the next step, I would imagine, to that. There are several school districts right now, Board Member Lindy, that do have AI policies. Several of the fellow superintendents that I work with have AI policies already. And I've noticed just with the reference that Board Member Morosky made, there is a lot of fear around AI and a lot of consternation around it. However, it is here. And I'm very familiar with the conference that Board Member Lindy referenced. I was actually asked to be a panelist on that at that conference, and just wasn't able to make it work this year. But it's really important for us to do that. We have some of our schools right now, Walnut Hills, for example, that has their own protocols around AI. So they do. So it's important that we do look at that as a district. So I'm really glad that this is an area that we'll be spending some time in, and I definitely look forward to giving some feedback.
So when I said early, what I meant was late.
Right on time, right on time.
Yeah, and I'll just speak for myself. I'm one of those people. I am by no means a Luddite, and I like technology. But yeah, I watch too much sci-fi. I don't know what it is, but the AI thing does kind of bug me out a little bit. So I would like, just for my own peace of mind, have some parameters. And it's nice to hear that there are already some policies. I'm not surprised the superintendent already knew about this. Mr. Lindy already brought it up. She's way more tech savvy. I'll speak for myself than I am, certainly. And so you can probably assist general counsel, it sounds like, superintendent, with some of these things already exist, and then we can slap that on the agenda. Ms. Davis, sound good for May? Cool. Ms. Mapp, any other business? Do you have any other business?
I do not.
All right. Well then, hearing of the public, if you want to speak, you can go ahead and raise your hand. It looks like we have 5 folks watching. I see some friendly names. Hello, friendly names. If you want to speak, go ahead and raise your hand. You got a couple minutes. Rob will get you in here. Just be sure, to put your name and affiliation with the district. We'll give you a couple minutes to do so. While you do so, I will tell all my colleagues, was sorry to miss you on Wednesday. As superintendent knows, I had told her a long, long time ago I was going to be gone when it was, I don't want to say just a committee of the whole, but I know it was elevated to a different status Wednesday. So I was thinking of you all, but not too much. Don't take that the wrong way. But I definitely, once I found out I could still chair this meeting remote, I was like, I'm all in. And since I've been up since 3:30, maybe I'll go back to bed now. Anyone raise their hand, Mr. Wilson?
No, sir.
All right. Well, friends who I see who came, thanks for swinging by the meeting this morning. Team, thank you so much. Here's your 33 minutes, and appreciate you, Ken. Appreciate you, Ben, superintendent, counsel's office, Phyllis, Rob. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Same to you.